well. Paul, the stage is yours.
Okay, so I need to be able to share my screen, which I can now do. I've just seen. Wonderful. Let me just move that out of the way. And then we'll go share. Okay, can everybody see my screen all right? A yes from somebody would be useful.
Yes.
Great, thank you. All right.
Yep. Cool.
Let's do this thing then. So first thing to say is feel free to interrupt me and ask questions as we go if you'd like to. I can't see the chat is the only thing that I would say. So you're going to need to interrupt me on the mic, or alternatively, I'm sure the lovely guys at UX Salon will compile a list of your questions from the chat.
I think there's also a way to raise your hand. So if you guys raise a hand, we can approach you. If you really, really want to talk, unmute yourself and go for it.
Yeah, just go for it. So what we're really talking about today is dark patterns, essentially. In case you're not aware of the term dark pattern, it's essentially a user interface element that's been carefully crafted to trick users into doing something they might not otherwise do, often by means of some form of psychological manipulation. I'm sure you're very much aware of these kinds of things and you've experienced them yourselves. So I did a little mock-up mine just to demonstrate the kind of thing. So if you're selling a pair of shoes, for example, and you wanted to manipulate people into buying insurance with their shoes, because, you might, then you would do a design a bit like this. So if you notice the buttons at the bottom of the screen, the one add to basket with insurance is highlighted green. It points onwards, while the button for add to basket without insurance points backwards, and it is not highlighted, right? So what you're doing there is you're relying on the fact that people are not paying attention to what they're doing, and that they'll easily miss little things like that. So that's a kind of quite a blatant design example, but there are loads of examples out there. One of my favorites is Etsy. I'm not sure whether you're familiar with Etsy. So Etsy sell one-off items, basically handcrafted, handmade items. And this particularly made me laugh out loud because on the Etsy site, they have this bit here, almost gone, right? Only one item left, right? And then immediately underneath, it says, well, it's a handmade item made to order. So there's never going to be more than one item, right? But they're trying to scare you. They're trying to think you're going to miss out on this item. And so they go on to say, and 3 people have already added this item to their basket, and it's been favorited by 63 other people. So any minute now, this item is going to disappear. So it's all about pressuring you into taking action early. What dark patterns are not are things like this, right? So overlays, okay? We see a lot of overlays on websites these days, and a lot of people kind of have started referring to them as dark patterns. They're not, because they're not actually manipulating you into doing something you wouldn't otherwise do. They are bloody annoying, right? But that's not the same as it being a dark pattern. So the reason I wanted to explain this up front is because I want to frame the rest of the discussion in terms of what I have a particular problem with, and what I'm going to go about addressing in the rest of this talk. So that's dark patterns. That's what they are. Overlays, that's another conversation that we can have in the Q&A time if you'd like to. Now, the primary reason that you will read about not using dark patterns. So if you look online, oh, hello, small child, I've just spotted. Hello. No, nothing at all. Hey, forced to wave back against her will. Sorry, totally got distracted then. I apologize. Right. Let's talk about, so the main argument against dark patterns, the main things, oh, now you wave by yourself. Okay, fair enough then. So the main argument against dark patterns is normally ethical, right? So you see posts like this, dark pattern design, it's downright unethical and irresponsible, right? And that's actually not that helpful, right? Talking in those terms. And I'll explain why. Imagine for a moment you are a marketing manager in a company, right? And it's your responsibility to increase the conversion rate in your company, right? And maybe your job is depending on it, or maybe your end of year bonus is depending on it. You can convince yourself anything is ethical, right? Because let's take, for example, that mock-up I did. Let's go back to it. This one here, okay? That is, you could argue ethical. And you could argue it's ethical. What is, you know, people are choosing to click on that button. I'm not forcing them to click on the button with insurance, right? I'm giving them a choice. So you can convince yourself of anything when it comes to ethics, all right? And so, and also, to be honest, organizations collectively aren't ethical, right? Individuals are ethical and individuals form ethics. And so things like how we assess our staff and the targets we set and those kinds of things often don't take ethics into account. So making a purely ethical argument is not going to convince people. So if we want to avoid adopting these dark patterns, then really we need to make a business case as to why they're a bad idea, okay? That's what we need to be aiming to do. Now, the problem is dark patterns work, right? So if I do things like, you know, that mock-up I showed you, you will see a dramatic increase in the number of people adding insurance to their purchase. Also, Etsy, when they tested that out on their website, they would have seen an uptake in conversion, right? They would have seen improvements. And we've got to consider, instead of just judging these people that are using dark patterns, we've got to consider that they find themselves under increasing pressure to meet their targets. And so it's hardly surprising that they turn to dark patterns as the answer. So if we're going to combat dark patterns, we need to actually identify solid business reasons. And I'm going to look at 3 possible reasons why dark patterns are bad for business, right? Number 1, consumers are cynical, savvy, and spoilt for choice, all right? So what I mean by that is that if your business wants to survive over the long term, okay, if it wants repeat business, if it wants to maximize the lifetime value of customers, then dark patterns are not a good idea. And they're not a good idea because consumers are cynical, savvy, and spoilt for choice. So let me give you an example of what I mean. One of the most famous examples of dark patterns is booking.com, right? If you've ever used booking.com, you've seen their dark patterns, right? Only 6 rooms left on our site. It's going to expire in a few minutes. 21 people are booking now. Quick, rush, make a fast, decision to book your place. Now, I did usability testing on booking.com, all right? And I want to share with you the feedback that I got from one particular participant. And this isn't an anomaly. It's not an outlier. This was what I was seeing time and time again on booking.com. I hate all of this manipulative crap, trying to convince me the room is about to sell out. I just ignore that stuff, right? There is an assumption that because dark patterns work, that people are unaware they're being manipulated. And that is an incorrect assumption, okay? This guy that was a participant knew the site was attempting to manipulate him. He concluded that he just ignored it. In truth, whether he thought he ignored it or not, subconsciously and statistically, it would be influencing his decision to purchase, right? So the dark pattern would appear to work in his case, and it would be easy to presume that because it works, he is unaware that he's being manipulated, but that is not true. People know they're being manipulated by companies, and they resent it, and it annoys them. Heck, if government is aware of it, then you know something's happening. So there's this organization in the UK called CMA, right? Some consumer rights group by the government. And it is enforcing action to bring an end to misleading sales tactics, hidden charges, and other practices in the online hotel booking, right? They might as well have said booking.com, right? Wholly unacceptable, they describe it as. So individuals and companies and government all are very aware that this is a problem and that this is happening. And I think already we're beginning to see the end of dark patterns because they're going to be increasingly legislated against. But even setting that aside, if you alienate people by trying to manipulate them, the chance of them coming back to your site to purchase again and again and again is extremely unlikely. Now, I asked that particular person, why do you choose to book through booking.com then, if they manipulate you so much? And he said, well, I ignore all that stuff and I find it a very easy website to use. So booking.com was succeeding despite their dark patterns, not because of them. It's the usability that was making them successful. And of course, the thing is that with, millions and millions of other options available to them, there is no reason why that one, that cynical, annoyed customer would ever come back to you. They just click on to your next competition. They'll move on. So users are cynical, savvy, and spoilt for choice. Next business reason against dark patterns is that one disgruntled customer can seriously undermine your brand, right? We now live in a world, and you see, this kind of manipulation isn't new, right? It's been around for years and years and years. But the thing is with it is that these days, we're in a world where you can not only find what your company's telling you, you can also find what everybody is saying about that company, right? So things like TripAdvisor have an enormous influence. So if somebody is pissed off at you because you've manipulated them into doing something they don't want to do, then they can vent on things like TripAdvisor and other review sites. So it's a very dangerous road. Alienating customers is extremely dangerous for the long-term health of your business. In fact, one disgruntled customer can even devastate a business, right? So for example, there was one customer who was annoyed at British Airways. I won't get into the details of the story, but essentially he decided to take out a promoted tweet that read, don't fly British Airways, their customer service is horrendous. And this one tweet got picked up by mainstream media, by the BBC, by the tech blogs. It went global and caused a major PR disaster for British Airways. And that's not an isolated story. One blog post once allegedly knocked a third off of Dell's share price because it was somebody that galvanized effectively a whole community of disgruntled people. It's dangerous to alienate users. Just ask Facebook, which had to apologize publicly on multiple occasions for carrying out psychological experiments on users. So disgruntled customers can damage your brand. Disgruntled customers will go elsewhere. And most of all, buyer's remorse costs your business. And this is the killer. This is the killer argument, right? So here we go. Let's say you work in an organization. When I was in the breakout room, I was chatting with a lady that works in a marketing team in her case, and she was under pressure to use dark patterns. And sure enough, when she does, she'll see an improvement. In this case, I've called it the UX team, right? Using dark patterns will see a improvement in conversion rate. But what her team and her manager probably is unaware of is the hidden costs that have on the rest of the organization. So for example, let's say it was the e-commerce or UX team that introduced dark patterns. The marketing team may find that their marketing spend doesn't go as far as it used to because they're trying to overcome the negativity that's coming out of the use of dark patterns and the negative comments online. Okay, so there's a cost there. Then, of course, there's a cost in support. As customer calls go up, saying, I didn't mean to buy insurance with my shoes. I want my money back. Okay, so there's those kinds of costs as well. And for example, the average in the UK, when somebody calls a customer service desk, it costs about £3.75. So that quickly adds up and is very dangerous. And then you've also got the cost of returns. If it's a physical thing that you've bounced people into buying, that you have to deal with the cost of the return process and all the admin involved with that. Assessing products as they arrive back in to assess whether or not they're suitable to restock. You have to then go through the effort of restocking them. So there are all these hidden costs that aren't obviously available. And the problem is that organizations exist in their little departmental silos and are not talking to one another. So you may well find that they're completely unaware that these costs are out there, that these costs are happening. I'll give you an example of that. I once worked with a consumer electronics company that produced high-end kettles, right? And they were under pressure the e-com team was under pressure to increase their sales. So they came up with the idea of bundling filters with the kettle, right? And the way they did that is by automatically, if you added the kettle to your basket, it would automatically add these filters as well. Now, of course, a lot of users didn't realize the filters had been automatically added. And they went ahead and checked out and they ended up paying for something they didn't want, right? And sure enough, it increased the average basket value and so therefore helped the e-com team meet their targets. What they didn't realize is that the number of those filters being returned actually cost more than it cost than the additional profit that was being gained from that, because nobody had done that calculation. Nobody had looked at the hidden costs. So really, dark patterns are bad for business, right? The only exception is if you were a company that didn't care about long-term sustainability of your business. Maybe you were out to scam people, right? And then you were going to disappear. By all means, use dark patterns then. They'll work for you. Great. Or maybe you're doing a one-off event, right? Where you're never going to want repeat customers. Then go for it. Use dark patterns from a business perspective and setting aside the ethics. But for everybody else, it's a very dangerous road to go down because it's going to lead to buyer's remorse and it's going to undermine repeat business. But it's not enough just to say to people, you shouldn't use dark patterns, right? We also need to give them a viable alternative. If we don't give them a viable alternative, then they're just stuck. So what are the alternatives to dark patterns? What can you do instead? Well, that's what the vast majority of my book is about, is outlining the different things that you can do. Now, I can't cover all of that now, so I've just picked three, right? Three of the biggest things that you can do, in my opinion, to increase conversion without resorting to manipulation. Now, actually, psychology is still involved, just in a different way. Okay, So the first thing is to reduce risk and build trust. Okay. So at the heart of every transaction that happens between two individuals, there has to be a degree of trust, right? Whether that transaction be something big like handing over money or something small like handing over your email address to sign up to a newsletter. I have to trust that you're going to honor your part of whatever that transaction is. So trust is incredibly important. And a related thing is risk, okay? If I asked you to sign up to a newsletter on a website, if I had one of those calls to action that says sign up for my newsletter, you need to understand that we are biologically programmed to look for danger, okay? So even in the most trivial of actions, we will look to identify the dangers of it. And signing up to a newsletter would be no exception to that, right? We would go, oh, what if they sell my email address? Are they going to spam me regularly? What if the content isn't relevant? Can I unsubscribe easily? Right? A whole load of risks, perceived risks in our minds. So our primary job is to reassure people and build trust. And I want to give you a slightly unusual use case or example of this in action. In the UK, there is a company called Love Honey. Now, Love Honey sell sex toys, okay? I know it's not a particularly, acceptable example, but it works very well to demonstrate what I'm talking about. You see, they decided to completely revolutionize how sex toys were positioned. Traditionally, sex toys have been aimed at men. They wanted to aim them at women, and in particular, women that had never bought a sex toy before, okay, that was very unsure about the process. So there was a lot of worries that their audience had, risks, okay? What if the package split, right, when it was delivered? What if my partner sees what's on the credit card, right? What if it starts vibrating in the package? What if I don't like it? And so there are all these kinds of concerns that people had around this purchase. And so Love Honey did an amazing job at addressing these concerns and reassuring people. So there's videos where you can see that things are triple wrapped so they don't split. They never include the batteries in the product so that it won't start vibrating. You've got LH Holdings is what appears on your credit card. They deal with all of these things, but by far the best one is their return policy, where they offer free returns for up to a year. You could use their product and return it a year later for a full refund. They don't want any objections to get in the way of people. So this kind of objection handling, right, is absolutely fundamental to encouraging people to take action. So what you're looking at here is the newsletter sign up on my own website, right? And look what I've done here in terms of the text. Okay. Objection number one people have, how they might spam me and I might get loads of emails from them every 2 weeks, I say. So they know exactly how often they're going to receive emails. Second one is, what if it's not relevant to me? You will receive support improving your site by creating a better user experience and more effective digital strategy. What if I don't like it and want to unsubscribe? You can unsubscribe in one click. Okay. And what they're going to do with my email address? I will never share your email address. And notice how I do that, not all buried in some privacy policy somewhere, but I'm doing it right by that call to action at the critical moment when people are making a decision whether or not to act. So things like allowing people to unsubscribe in one click helps reassure people, reduces the risk and the concerns in their minds. Then there's things like being clear and upfront about your calls to your pricing, that there's no hidden delivery charges or anything like that. because, you know, those are the kinds of things that alienate people and annoy people. I recently, over Christmas, sorry, not over Christmas, over lockdown, how I got those two confused, I don't know. But anyway, over the lockdown period, like most people, I have put on quite a lot of weight, right? So I decided to sign up to Weight Watchers. And I accidentally signed up to a tie-in contract for 6 months, okay? Because their website wasn't very clear. And it was hugely frustrating and annoying because obviously 2 weeks later, I just gave up on the whole idea and didn't want to have to keep paying for 6 months, right? So being clear and upfront with people builds trust. Their website was made to be intentionally ambiguous, and that undermines trust rather than builds it. Using plain English as well, right? Things like plain English privacy policies and terms and conditions builds trust with people rather than undermines it. Being things like easily contactable and giving fast responses to people. You know, those websites that hide their email address, it always feels shifty, doesn't it? Right? And it undermines trust, but also it increases risk because you think, I'm not going to be able to get hold of people easily. So we need to be addressing people's questions and handling their objections. And do you know what people's objections are? Do you know why they might not be buying? And that's why we need to do things like top task analysis, where we identify all the different things that people want to know about and understand. And what you'll find is that probably a small number of things are by far more critical than anything else. Maybe people are most concerned about stuff like return policy or delivery charges. So those are the things you concentrate on. But the best thing you can do, to be honest, if you don't know what people's objections are or concerns are, ask them. So I run a number of different video masterclasses, right? And one of them, when I run them, what I do is if somebody doesn't enroll on my masterclasses, they go to exit, I show this survey. If you decide not to enroll today, it'd be useful to know why. And I list a load of reasons. And that enables me to constantly refine and improve my landing page by addressing their objections and their concerns. So build trust, reduce risk, address objections, but also reduce cognitive load. Now, let me take a moment to explain what cognitive load is. So we've essentially got two sides to or two systems in our brain, right? Two different ways that we think. There's system one. So system one is that fast, automatic, and intuitive and emotional way of thinking, right? So by far the majority of decisions that we make every day are unconscious using system one. So I've seen the videos of everybody on the screen as I'm speaking, right? I'm watching you. And, you know, there have been people that have been sweeping their hair back out of their face. Are they going, my hair is tickling my face, I'm going to sweep it out of the way? No, they're not thinking about it. They're not conscious of that. I've seen other people pick up and take a drink. Are they going, I'm feeling thirsty, I have a drink on my table, I shall pick up the drink and I shall take a drink? No, it's all done subconsciously, isn't it? Right? So that's system one. The other system we have is system two, which is slower and more deliberate. And so it's where we make our logical, considered decisions, our conscious decisions. But the problem with system two is it gets easily tired, right? It gets worn out. Okay. So it's really important that we don't overstress system two, that we make as many decisions as possible to be intuitive, system one decisions. Because what happens is when system two begins to get overwhelmed, when it finds things too hard, that's what is known as cognitive load. All right. Now, cognitive load has big consequences. When people's cognitive load is high, everything feels harder. It feels difficult. It feels challenging. And that makes it feel unfamiliar and confusing to them, right? And that makes it feel untrue, deceitful, manipulative, even if it's not. And most of all, it feels bad. So effectively, when cognitive load is high, we get overwhelmed. And cognitive load is made high by all the things we're really familiar with as designers. If we're in a bad mood, you know, when you wake up those days and you're just in a bad mood, right? And everything that day seems to go wrong. Everything is harder. Everything is more difficult. And that's because when you wake up, your bad mood is putting your cognitive load, making it very high. And when your cognitive load is high, everything feels harder and unfamiliar and untrue and bad, right? So your mood makes a big point, which is why aesthetic design that is positive and reassuring and upbeat helps with our mood. Also, inconsistencies in the user interface that we present increases cognitive load. A confusing display where there's too much going on increases our cognitive load. When it doesn't behave as we expect it to. So if we're poorly primed for what we're looking at. So maybe if the search box isn't where we expected it to be, it increases cognitive load. So one of the best ways you can actually increase conversion isn't to manipulate people, but it's just to make things easy, to reduce people's cognitive load. So every element on our websites need to justify their inclusion, right? So, you know, absolutely everything. So what marketers often want to do in our desperation to convince people is we add more and more. But all we're doing by doing that is increasing people's cognitive load and reducing their ability to process the information that's there. So ask yourself with every single element on any page of your website, can I remove it? What would the impact be? Actually, if you can, you'll be able to remove way more than you think you can. All those social media buttons, get rid of them because they're just distracting from your primary calls to action. That happy text that welcomes you to the site, get rid of it. It's just increasing cognitive load. It's another thing for people to process. If you really can't get rid of it, can you hide it? Can you put it deeper in the site or put it under an accordion or a tab to get it out of people's faces? And if you can't hide it, can you shrink it? Can you visually de-emphasize it? Sure, you have to have legal notices on your website, but they don't have to be massive. Those cookie notifications don't need to be huge. So we need to simplify, radical simplification of our user interfaces. The other way that we can reduce cognitive load is limit the number of things we're asking people to do. We overwhelm people with so many choices and decisions. What do you want people to do on your website? Do you want them to follow you on social media? Do you want them to sign up for your newsletter? Do you want to encourage them to make a purchase or share this? Make up your mind. The more things we put in front of people, the more they're likely to suffer from what's called choice paralysis, where they just don't know what to do. So we need to simplify. We also need to make sure that if we do offer multiple choices, those choices are really clear and distinct from one another. Until very recently, this is what the Amazon iOS app looked like if you went to pre-order a video game. I often pre-order video games, and this is what you'd be presented with. 2 buttons. Pre-order this item today or pre-order it now. Can you tell me what the difference is? I can't. So that's a classic example of where you have 2 options very similar to one another. People don't know what to click, so they don't click either. They just abandon and go to a website that's easier. You're pushing their cognitive load up. Now, individually, these things might not overwhelm them, but collectively it does. Also, be very aware that when you sit in front of a design and you're looking at a design, you're giving it your full attention. So it may look obvious and intuitive to you, but it won't necessarily to other people. So, yes, dark patterns do work, but there are more effective approaches that you can take to improve conversion. Techniques built around reducing cognitive load by simplifying your site, overcoming things like analysis paralysis, choice paralysis, or matching the user's mental model better. So I've just given you a tiny little glimpse into the kind of things that go into the book. But I hope now you can see that actually, I hope I've done two things. One, I hope I've given you a good case that you can take to colleagues to say, look, pursuing these dark patterns and these annoying things that irritate users actually is bad for our business over the long term. And that, look, there are alternatives. There are just as good ways of improving conversion using things like, reducing cognitive load, etc., etc. If you do want to pick up the book, because the rumor was that my publisher might be in the room today. And so if I don't push the book, I will get a slap
actually
on the
can't
hand.
make it today. He's not here.
Sorry, is he here?
No, he's not here, unfortunately.
Oh, but that doesn't matter then. Don't buy the book. It's a load of rubbish. Right. So I will take some questions, but I do just want to leave you with some resources to help out. You can ignore the first one because I should have deleted that from my slide set. How unprofessional am I? But the second and third one might work for you, right? So the second one is a how-to guide for improving your conversion rate. Okay, so it's a blog post that covers all of that. But the one you really want to pay attention to is the third one, is the download this slide deck, right? Because in this slide deck, it's got a load of links to loads of articles and things I've written about everything from cognitive load to everything else, right? So download the slide deck, and that hopefully should answer all the questions that you have. But for now, let's drop out of the stop the screen sharing.
So
and,
we will
answer a few questions.
We will share these links in the Google Doc after. You can send it to me, and I can post it into the Google Docs.
Okay.
Guys, if you have a question, I've seen a question in the Google Doc, but you can write it here. So I'm going to go to the Google Doc for a second. Okay, the question is, where does Love Honey communicate the trust? All throughout the user journey or at the specific points?
It does it at various points in the user journey. That when you're talking in the right way immediately, because you're talking about the user journey, right? Which is great. And one of the things that's so important with the user journey is that different questions occur to people at different moments in that user journey, right? So in the example of Love Honey, for example, for example, when they're looking at a product for the first time, that product may seem quite scary and quite intimidating. So that's the kind of moment they're asking the question, what if I don't like it? So that's where you'll find that they're emphasizing things like, 365-day return policy. But when it comes to things like entering your address, that's when they talk about it's triple wrapped, because that's when people are thinking about this thing turning up at their house. When they enter their credit card, that's the moment you say what's on the credit card. Okay. Now, all of that information is available just kind of generically in a frequently asked questions section, because some people will think of those things sooner. But yeah, you're right. It's about picking those specific moments. And that's such a critical part, not just with dealing with objections, but with your calls to action as well. And I can give you a real example of this that happened to me only yesterday, right? I saw somebody posted on LinkedIn about a report, okay? Download a free report on whatever. And it did look of interest. So I went through to the website just to find out a bit more about the report. Now, immediately, me arriving on the website, big overlay, okay, blocking out everything else on the screen, saying, give us your information so you can download the report. Hang on a minute. I haven't even seen the report yet. I don't know whether I want it. It was the wrong moment to ask me. Another common example of this is when you go to e-commerce sites. Have you ever been to an e-commerce site? And this is deadly for sales. You go to an e-commerce site and it pops up with an overlay, 30% off your first order if you sign up for our newsletter immediately, right? And what do? Everyone closes that. The reason that they close it is they haven't seen any products to know whether they want 30% off. Now that's bad enough in itself, but now you go on, look through the site, and you find a product you like. Now I want my 30% off. How do I get it? Oh, it's gone. It's too late. Now the product looks 30% overpriced, and so I won't buy it. Timing is everything when it comes to conversion rate optimization.
So I want to ask something. I think that the most prominent where I see the dark patterns are when I'm trying to buy a flight ticket, especially in the low cost arena.
Yeah.
But I mean, by the way, if anyone here worked on a product that they had to use a dark pattern, please shout out. I want you to unmute yourself and tell us about it. But how do you tell your boss that you don't want to do that? I mean, what do you do if this is the common consensus that we have to add, the seats and the insurance? And I mean, this is the common practice already.
Yeah.
So how do you object?
So airlines are a bit of a peculiarity. Budget airlines are a weird one. The reason that they're weird is because part of the way that they project themselves as being budget and cheap is purposely giving a poor experience, right? That's why they do all the things about baggage and queuing and all the various other things, because it reinforces that view that they're cheap. So it's a weird one, airlines. But let's set that, budget airlines anyway, let's set that aside for a second and deal with the fundamental issue that you were saying of how do we convince people not to do this? Well, that's where we go back essentially to that two-pronged attack I talked about in the presentation. First of all, you have to demonstrate the cost of doing it, right? So in terms of, that's where I would start collecting negative things from usability testing that people have said, or looking online for people that are slagging off the airline, or look at the analytics and the dropout rates at those particular points, right? So assemble a case for saying, look, this is not, this is damaging the business. Yes, it is increasing conversion in the short term, but it's having a negative impact in all of these other areas, right? So there is some research and legwork required. You can't say some magic words and it will make everything all right. So that's one half of it. Then the other half is to say, well, yeah, but there are other ways we could improve conversion, right? So let me give you an example with airlines in mind, okay? Now, some airline flights are all to do with business travel. Let's set that aside for a minute. But let's say you were booking a family holiday, okay? Now, think about the mental model we have when we book a family holiday, right? We know we want to go over the summer holidays when the kids are off of school. We know that our budget is approximately this. We know we want to go somewhere sunny, okay? And we might want to, not have too long a flight. Now imagine going to any flight booking site. What's the first thing they ask you? Where do you want to go? When do you want to go? Exact dates. I don't know the answers to that. What I'm being asked doesn't match my mental model at all, right? I want to see, well, what's the cheapest flights I can get at some point in August, in this 6-week period that people are off of schools, give me, and within a 3-hour flight distance, right? And someone's just pointed out that some people are starting to do this now, offering flexible dates. But there's so much more you could do around that kind of stuff that actually provides a better user experience, right? Yeah, and Google Flights is pretty good at that. Yeah, they've started adopting it. That provides a better user experience and actually will put up conversion way more than sneaking in some insurance onto their basket.
Okay. Guys, if you are, by the way, I'm so amazed how many people from around the world I see here, from India, by the way, shout out to Lithuania. There's a lot of people from Lithuania. I miss you guys. I hope to see you soon. And from Europe. Guys, come on microphone, because I don't want to read your questions. Ask the question yourself. Let's hear you.
That's very mean.
Hi.
Asking.
Hi.
hello.
Okay. Yes. Go for
Oh,
it.
your daughter's gone. Where's your daughter?
She's here. She's here. She's just playing.
Are you saying that she got bored of my talk?
No. She's
Sorry,
actually
ask your question.
okay. Yeah, it's
Where are you
it's
from, by
about
the way?
it's about my name is Abdulganil Onabanjo. I'm a web designer. Then I also work as a product designer for companies. So, and I work for a company on a contract base as a product designer. The company is into retail businesses. So, talking about dark patterns, I see because because they want to put the product out there just in form of a way of dark patterns. But one thing is that I try to advise them based on the ethical way of putting things, but they don't want to go that way. They just want to do it that way to actually get more to attract more customers. So
Right.
why I just look at it that so I find it very, very difficult to convince them to actually do it the ethical way, not using a kind of a dark button to convert customers, but they want to do it that way. So how do you relate with such customers, and how do you, and they eventually did it their way. So and if we have such customers or such employer, so how do we just convince them to actually make sure that they do something
Because
better?
business is always like, the major, like if it works with the business. So let's talk about ethics a little bit, maybe. How, like, what is the tools for the ethical designer? Do you have some thoughts about that?
I think, yeah, I mean, we can certainly establish our own ethics of what we're comfortable doing and what we're not. One of in answer to the question, one of the very powerful ways of doing that in your particular situation, because you're a contractor, is to say, look, there are alternatives that I believe would achieve the same results. And I'm uncomfortable doing these dark patterns. And I'm uncomfortable because increasingly governments are legislating against this kind of behavior. I'm worried it's going to damage your business over the long term. And that not only do I find it a little bit unethical to take this approach personally, don't make them sound like they're bad people because you'll just put their backs up. That's the other problem with ethics, is that, it's, if you say to someone what you're doing is unethical, you're really going to irritate them. But say I'm uncomfortable doing it, and so I in all honesty, I can't continue working with you because I'm going to damage your business and because I'm going to do something that I feel uncomfortable with. Right now, that is a bit of a gamble, okay? Because potentially they'll say bye then, right? But in the vast majority of cases, it shocks people. Wow, he's willing to walk away from this contract over this. He's serious. He really believes this. Okay. It's the same. You can do the same thing, right? Maybe you've got in your contract that your name is mentioned on the site in some ways, web design by ... That's another thing you can say is, look, I don't want my name associated with this if you're going to adopt dark patterns, right? And people go, wow, he really is serious about this if he's willing to give up free publicity. Do you see what I mean? So it's about putting your money where your mouth is to some extent. But yeah, the ethical argument I tend to avoid because it often just alienates people. That said, just before my book was published, they published my same publisher published another book called Ethical Web Design, that looks at the various ethical components. But that's more from how we as designers should take responsibility rather than necessarily convincing clients. Really, the ethical argument, I think, is pretty much a dead end when talking to clients.
Can I add something?
Yeah, go for it.
Hi.
Yes. What is your name? Where are you from?
I'm Sivan. I'm from Israel. and I'm a cognitive psychologist. And let's set aside for a moment both reputation and regulations and even ethical arguments. There's also some basic rule of thumb that says that retention always costs less than acquisition.
Yeah.
So I think that I find it like the winning argument for me.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I talk about that in the book because, you know, it is very expensive to continually win new clients all the time. So anything you can do to maintain that client relationship, and that's why a lot of companies measure not just conversion rate but lifetime value. Sorry, Joanna, you wanted her to repeat that. Can you just say it again for someone in the chat room? They missed it.
I just said that there's a basic rule of thumb that says that acquisition is always more expensive than retention, and it's
Let me
it will
explain that. What
always,
does that mean? I'm like,
it will always cost you
elaborate.
more to gain more customers than to retain and to maintain your loyal existing customers. Retention is less expensive than acquisition of new customers.
Yeah, and quite considerably so.
Yeah.
You know, and so that's why so many companies focus on maintaining a customer for as long as they possibly can. It's the cost, the marketing costs basically of getting a new customer is extremely high. That's a really good point. Thank you for raising that one.
Perhaps to follow up on this, perhaps a good way to present it is not present the opposite of ethical as unethical or bad, is just the opposite of ethical as relationship. Like ethical is destroying relationship, and unethical is destroying relationship, and ethical is building relationship. And then you can connect it to the retention argument and also the long-term business argument. Like the opposite of ethical is immediate and expensive.
Yeah.
And ethics is another way of good relationship, like you have with friends. Like the same reason you have to maintain good relationship with friends is not only is ethics, because you need to treat your friends right, but is also beneficial for both of you in the long run. Yeah.
Absolutely. Now, I'm quite interested. There's somebody I in the chat room who's just posted. I'm not going to say your name because I'll just destroy it. Who's just posted they want to express a different opinion in regards to dark patterns. Yes, come on. Let's have a devil's advocate. Let's have somebody argue.
Come on, camera.
Thank you. I'm sorry. I don't have a camera.
That's right.
My connection is quite slow here. So actually the example you showed us all with shoes, it's a scam. It's not a dark art. It's terrible. You can't trick people with selling something hidden. However, the Booking.com and airlines, I truly believe they're doing very well, because the thing is not really what you promise, but the thing is if you keep that promise. I've been working with many e-commerce companies in my life, and we use those cognitive biases, like 4 rooms left, the last item, and so on. But we really meant that. And this meant, for example, if page says that there's a last item and you're still thinking that, well, it's not. Well, it is. And if you and when user comes later, the item is gone. And this is really how we got a lot of respect from users, because we really meant that. If we say that this is last item, it's the last item. If we say there's like 10 people looking at the page, this means that item will be sold out soon. If we say that price will go up in 5 hours, we do so. And there's no place for bargain. Nobody can say, hey guys, you said the price was lower like 5 hours ago. Yes, it was. So why did you buy then?
Yeah.
And to be honest, we're doing well, really well.
Yeah.
The thing I believe that you have to keep your promise.
Yes, and I really like that way of thinking about it. And actually, you know, I'll give you an example of where you could argue I use dark patterns based on my own opinion, which is that I only open my courses twice a year for a week. And I do that to encourage people to take action then, rather than putting it off and putting it off and putting it off. So you could argue that's a dark pattern. So, so you're entirely right. You've got a really valid point, but the problem is you could argue, right? What you think and what I think is actually irrelevant. It's what those individual users who come to your site think at that particular moment. And that's the trouble with dark patterns. It's not black and white, all right? It's all dependent on perception. Even if you keep those promises, now it might work in your particular case. You might have built up trust with your audience through other means, and that they've learnt to trust what you write. McGray patterns, maybe. Yeah, I don't know. I'm not into making up names. But yeah, they've learned to trust you. And so they've learned to trust that number, you know, of how many things are in stock or whatever else is true and correct. However, a new user coming into that website for the first time might not get that impression. They might go, oh, it's another, you know, website trying to push this scarcity thing on me, right? So it's all down to perception. And that's why you can't make sweeping generalizations about any of this stuff. 50 Shades of Dark. Sorry, I get distracted by the chat room. So yeah, there are no absolutes, but thank you for raising that, because you do make a good point. There are times and places for some of these things. And it's, you know, it's a good one. Thank you.
Anyone else can unmute. I want to ask also, you know, sometimes dark patterns are not so visible. For example, like they track your location and they change the price by that. What do you think about that? How is that, like, something that is not completely visible still is a little bit shady?
Yeah, I mean,
or maybe it's a selling point. Maybe it's a way to sell. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, there are all kinds of shady tricks, but if we go back to how I defined dark patterns at the beginning, and that's why I did define them at the beginning, by my definition, you know, I'm talking about user interface elements, things in the user interface. There's all kinds of dodgy crap that goes on under the surface, you know, in terms of tracking you from website to website. And so the arguments that I put up there are not so valid, because in those kinds of cases, my business arguments fall down, because my business arguments are primarily based on the user's awareness that you're attempting to manipulate them in some way. So you'd need another set of arguments around those kinds of things that I suspect will probably be built on things like performance, because, you know, the kind of tracking that we often do on websites often comes with quite a high performance load. You know, even doing things like running A/B testing, which you should be doing, you know, has a high performance hit associated with it. But all kinds of things, you know, those third-party social media buttons that you use on your website, terrible for performance. You know, so there are all these performance hits, and performance, again, really is probably even bigger than all of the things I've talked about. Is the number one thing that will affect conversion. You know, if you don't have if you have poor performance on your website, you know, it will devastate your conversion rate.
Neil, you have a point. Come on, Mike. Let me hear you.
Hi, Paul.
Hi.
We spoke yesterday on LinkedIn.
Oh yeah, hello.
I booked a holiday. It's something that stuck in my mind about a year ago to Amsterdam. You know, remember when we could go on holiday?
Yeah, good old days.
Yeah, and I had all the usual patterns of, you know, hurry up, this is going, there's this many rooms left and everything else. When I got actually through to the checkout, the price went up 10%. And it had like I can't remember the exact statement, but it was along the lines of this has been really popular and things are booked out, and, you know, sorry. And I think just because of, you know, the business that I'm in, and I know a lot of friends that are developers, I was kind of wise to that. A lot of people wouldn't be. And I actually started the journey again completely from scratch in incognito mode in Chrome. And when I got to the same spot, the same point, it didn't put the price up, but it did spot my email address. So it said, oh, you're a member, do you want to sign in? Immediately as soon as I signed in, it jumped the price back up.
Yeah.
So I ended up going back in for a third time in private browsing mode and basically just going in as a guest, I think, to get it. So I still used Expedia, but because they were the cheapest for the whole thing. But I tell everybody that story. So it's not,
and that's it. And that's it. It doesn't take every user that goes to Expedia to spot that problem, right? Like you say, a lot of people aren't going to notice it, and they're certainly not going to open up an incognito mode and go through the whole thing again. But you spotted it. And now you spotted it. What are you doing? You're now telling 115 people that in this room right now. And you maybe will post a review somewhere. And you maybe will tell your friend. The average person has 356 friends on Facebook alone, right? We now live in a world where you can't hide this shit. It will come out, you know. And even going back to the ethics around the hidden stuff, you know, Facebook psychological experiments were hidden, but it came out. It comes out. There is no hiding these things today.
I think the one thing that struck me just before I go is that my trip went up 10%. If everybody using Expedia's goes through that whole thing and 99% of people don't know about it, that's a lot of extra money they're making on a rogue bit of code, essentially.
Yeah. And yes, they will make money out of it. I don't deny that. They'll make a lot of money out of it. And then one day they won't. One day, especially with a company of the size of Expedia, one day that will get picked up by the BBC or the Guardian or somebody like that. And it will cause a major PR disaster that will take them, you know, a huge number of people to mop up that crap. Right. And, you know, that's when they start wiping out their profit margins for it. Could they remain profitable from doing it? Of course they could, you know, but it's that trade-off, isn't it? The companies that survive for the long term are those companies that build trust and loyalty in their customers.
Mary, you have a point. Come on, microphone.
Yeah, hi.
Hello, Mary.
Okay, I am working on a map navigation app. And I think that the situation is kind of special because we need people to enter their information to complete the map and the details about it, like entering information about their company, so we can enrich our information for other users. But most of them doesn't trust because it seems kind of strategic and maybe a little political. What should we do then? No, it's kind of.
This is where you get back. You get back to the whole thing about building trust, and there are so many different things that I think I've got a whole chapter on trust, as I remember. There are so many little things that add up to your perception of what is trustworthy and what is not. And there's an effect which I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with called the halo effect, where one characteristic affects our perception of another. So, you know, handsome people tend to be more trustworthy, even though there's no correlation there. So really it's the devil's in the detail when it comes to building trust. You know, it's the tone of your copy. It's the, you know, the details of the design. It's, you know, is the telephone number hidden? That concerns you. If there's typos and things on the site, it concerns you. If the privacy policy isn't written in clear English and seems to be, you know, you get a vibe, don't you, from these things? You get a sense of whether this is trustworthy or not. So I can't kind of give you well, if you do this, that will sort it, because it is the devil's in the detail. It's all those tiny things. So what I would advise in your situation is doing exactly what I suggested, which is to do an exit intent survey. If people go to leave and they haven't committed to, you know, to entering their information, just ask them why. You know, ask them, why did you feel uncomfortable, and give them a load of various, you know, methods of doing that. Somebody suggested that gamification might be a way of doing it. And no, I wouldn't consider gamification a dark pattern, because yes, it is influencing. Oh, I see. You're talking more generally rather than specifically in Mary's case. So one of the things, Mary, I'll come back to the comment in a minute, but in regards to your situation, one way, a very subtle or understated gamification is just to have a progress bar, right? Mm-hmm. You filled in this much, okay? LinkedIn do this, right? And it mentally will annoy us if it's not complete, okay? We love completing things. So just something like that may help, or giving people a badge if they complete it fully, or a discount, or explaining the benefits better. You know, all of these little things can make a big difference. Switching to the comment that's been made in the chat room about is gamification a dark pattern if it's influencing people to spend money in exchange for a virtual or not material reward. I mean, I'm guessing you're talking about things like loot boxes and in-app purchases and all of that kind of good stuff. Again, it's all about perception, isn't it? So let's take what happens a lot in games at the moment, where you can get additional things in the game by spending real money. Now, you know, for my generation, right? For people like me, that's ridiculous. I'm not paying money for a thing that isn't real, you know, that isn't a real thing. Yeah, I'll pay money to go and buy a new shirt, but I'm not going to pay money to buy a shirt in a stupid game. Yet my son has a totally different attitude. He'll spend money to make his avatar in a game look amazing, but he won't spend money on real clothes, and he looks like he's been dragged through a hedge backwards, right? So it's a matter of the generation. It might be a generational thing or a cultural thing or all kinds of other considerations. But there are kind of standards that emerge that we need to be very sensitive to. So as to what is considered acceptable and what is not, just the same as we have social etiquette in all areas of our life. So, for example, in games these days, it's kind of socially acceptable to have loot boxes and virtual goods and things like that, as long as it doesn't enhance the gameplay. So it's just a cosmetic benefit rather than giving people an advantage in the game, right? So those kinds of feelings emerge, and it's our job as marketers and designers to remain sensitive to what our audience will accept and not accept. What they're comfortable with, what they consider ethical. One of the best talks I ever heard on dark patterns, the speaker, and I can't remember his name, which is really annoying. The rule of thumb that he used to decide whether he should do something or not is, if I explained exactly what I'm doing to the user and why I'm doing it, would they be comfortable? Okay. So going back to Neil's example, where he was talking about the Expedia experience, I would argue they would feel uncomfortable with that. You've increased the price for 10% for no reason. However, going back to maybe the stock example that the gentleman that disagreed with me brought up, if you explain, look, there really is only one thing in stock, and we're just trying to communicate so you're aware, then I think they'd probably be comfortable. So you can use that kind of thing as a rule of thumb, but that requires you to know your audience really well. And that's where you come back to things like user research and why that's so important.
All right, I see Anitika. Anitika raised her hand, right?
Yeah, hi. Hi, Paul. So I'm a user researcher, and I actually have this thing like going on my mind for a very long time. So I have happened to work on one of the fantasy sport project, Dream 11, etc. So when a player has to withdraw the money, like whatever they have won, when they withdraw money, mostly these companies tie up with some bank, and that's how the payment gateway works. So these company, like the bank, they also take all the information of the user, and this is nowhere actually disclosed that your whole personal information would be going to the bank, and you would be that's how you are receiving the advertisement call or whatever extra purpose the information is used. So like this is something I was like not very comfortable with, and I tried to work around some way for the UX writing or some way to give this information that your information might be used, but the company didn't agree. So in cases like this, how can we work around? What can be done?
Yeah. So a lot of it comes down to how you present it to the rest of the company, if I'm honest, right? And in that case, I would have gone in to management and say, I think I've identified a way of us getting a competitive advantage over our competition, a way of making people perceive our competition as less trustworthy. We need to add to our site a statement that says, unlike our competitors, we believe in being open and transparent about how we use your data, right? Mm-hmm. And actually use that a way of naming and shaming the competition. Don't be afraid to do that. You know, that's good business. If they're doing something that puts them at a disadvantage, you use that. So actually, I think sometimes that can be the best way of arguing against dark patterns, is to say, look, if we do this, if we decide to drop insurance out of the shopping basket while everyone else is, there's a PR opportunity there. There's an opportunity to say, we're the trustworthy airline, right? We're the ones that don't screw you over. And that's a way of differentiating yourself in the market. So a lot of the time it's about how you present it. So it might be that you want to go back and try having that conversation again, but take that different angle with it. But it is difficult because you don't want to overwhelm people with so much information, right? It's like a lot of the cookie notifications these days, right? You know, GDPR has put such pressure on us to be open and transparent with people that actually it's made us more opaque because we're trying to tell them so much that we overwhelm them. But, you know, a simple statement like, you know, we've collaborated with this well-known, well-respected bank and we pass their data to them, you know, that's okay. That could actually add credibility rather than detracting from it. You know, be open about the bank, be open about who you're doing it with, you know?
Okay, and Noam, do you have a point that you want to make about Skyscanner? Is he here? No words from Noam. Okay, Tonya? Oh, here he is.
No, that's near. That's no.
Near. Okay.
But let me just address. I can address the question anyway. That's a difficult one. I don't know whether I would consider that a dark pattern because regional differences do affect pricing. It sucks. It shouldn't be that way, but it kind of is because of, you know, all kinds of things from local taxes to government legislation and all kinds of things. But the fact that it's being perceived as a dark pattern, right, means that it needs addressing. Okay. So, you know, it might be that somewhere on the site you have to say, you know, our prices will vary from region because of this. And that's a really good, a big mistake that people often make is they kind of cross their fingers and hope that people aren't thinking what they hope they're not thinking. So I'll give you an example because that was terribly worded, right? We've all heard the rumors about McDonald's, right? That McDonald's chicken nuggets may contain chicken, but no, there are no guarantees of which bit of the chicken is in it. Or that their fries don't contain potato or whatever else, you know, these urban legends that go around. Now, a lot of companies would take the attitude of, well, let's not bring it up. Let's just hope they don't think it. But today on the internet, everything's out there. Everything's in people's faces, you know. And so McDonald's very wisely addressed this on their website. And if you go to their website, it will say, you know, we only use chicken breast, right? Even in our chicken nuggets. Okay. So it doesn't say, we know that some of you might be thinking that our chicken nuggets are made of testicles. You know, it's not doing anything silly like that, but it is addressing the issue. So in Skyscanner's case, maybe they just need to address the issue.
Good point. Nir, you wanted to say something?
I wanted to come back to the one-time interactions, because a lot of businesses that rely on one-time users, they don't have any interest of building trust over time. Because and they actually benefit the most from dark patterns, except in, especially in download in a download or torrent site or something like that, when it's just random users. Perhaps in this situation, it's about your point in system 1 and system 2, and perhaps this is the moment to address system 2 to let users, like one-time users, to, like you did in your newsletter section in your website, like to raise the things that perhaps they are afraid of and give them answers even before they ask. Perhaps this is a way to go about. If you can't build trust, then perhaps bring the important messages up front clearly.
But I would actually count that as building trust. You know, you don't need to have multiple visits necessarily to build trust. You can build trust in the way that you present yourself and the way you communicate. Hopefully you guys might never have encountered me before, but I'm hoping by the end of this, you consider me trustworthy and knowledgeable and all those kinds of things. And I've demonstrated that in this one section of time. So it's not that you need to have multiple meetings with me before you fully, you know, before you start to trust me. Obviously, the more time, the more contact you have with me, the more you trust me, but you can start doing it straight away. But what that does raise is an interesting thing that I've never considered before, which is many of the dark patterns that we implement actually are forcing people's cognitive load up. So you know, things like having to keep an eye out to make sure they're not manipulating me and all of those kinds of things are actually forcing our cognitive load higher. So it may well be that actually, even for single users, it's worth removing the dark patterns to see what the impact is. And that's a general rule that I often use is don't try and argue the case theoretically, test it and see, right? If you've got dark patterns on your website, say to management, well, let's send 20% of our users to a version without them and see what effect that has on conversion.
Very good point.
And Sarah makes a good point that one-time users can recommend or diss us to another user. So that goes to the thing of
the trust point is not about retention or returning users. It could be a one-time event or just a matter of image of the image of the company.
All right. Anyone else before we close this? I want to say that it's been amazing on the Google Doc. Guys, if you made notes separately, please add them to the Google Docs because we can refer to them later. We will add some links. I'm going to add the recording of this event, the YouTube recording, and so forth. If anyone else has a question, welcome to do it now before we close. Okay, it seems that it's good to go. Oh, Juliana. Oh, what's this? Oh, great event. Thanks. So yeah, by the way, there's like a representative from Canada. Salon has a branch in Canada and also in Vilnius and Berlin. So I'm kind of enthused to see all of them. It's kind of the first time I'm seeing everyone from around the world. It's amazing to see you guys all. Again, thank you for participating. Thank you, Paul, for this amazing hour. I think we learned a lot. And I hope to see you in the UX Salon Words, which is coming up in a few weeks. So that's it. Thank you all. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Paul.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye, thanks.
That was amazing. Thanks.
Great to see you guys. Bye for now.